During dinner with my son, I received a text message. Get out. He's selling your house tonight. During dinner with my son, my phone buzzed with a message from a stranger. 6 words that turned my world upside down. Get out now. He's selling your house. Tonight. My son, my only child, sat across from me smiling, and I knew exactly who he was. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The lights from the yachts at the Seattle harbor glittered through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a fake, shimmering piece across our table. It was just past 7. The air smelled of salt and money. In front of me, a half-dozen oysters glistened on a bed of ice. I picked up the small silver fork, preparing to pry one loose from its shell. It was supposed to be a nice evening, a chance to reconnect. Across the white tablecloth, my son, Evan, sat beside a man named Carter Lawson. Evan had called him his new business partner. I just saw a shark in a $1,000 suit. Carter's smile was too smooth, too practiced. Evan's was strained. He kept adjusting his tie and wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Carter slid a sleek iPad across the table, placing it next to the bottle of chilled white wine. The screen was dark. I've prepared a few documents for you to look over, Marjorie. Just for convenience, Carter said, his voice like polished stone. Digital age, everything needs to be fast. Evan nodded quickly, a puppet on a string. That's right, Mom. Just a quick look so we don't waste anyone's time later. Waste whose time? The question formed in my mind, sharp and cold. But before I could ask, my phone, resting by my plate, gave a soft buzz, a text message. I glanced down, my annoyance momentarily shifting. It was an unknown number. My thumb swiped the screen open. Get out now. He's selling your house. Tonight. The words didn't register at first. They were just black letters on a white screen. Then I saw the attachment below it. A picture. I tapped it open. It was a screenshot of a DocuSign page. The digital letterhead was stark and official. And there, under the heading Prepared For, was my name, Marjorie Hale. Below it, my address. The address of the Queen Anne house I had lived in for 50 years. The house my husband and I had built our lives in. The house where I had raised Evan. My name was already typed into the signature field, waiting for a final binding click. The silver fork in my hand froze mid-air. It slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the porcelain plate with a tiny, sharp clink. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence of my world. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold tide pulling away from my skin, leaving me hollow. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. They were watching me. I knew they were. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted my head. I forced my lips into a neutral line. I looked past Carter's predatory grin, past the glittering harbor lights, and met my son's gaze. He flinched. I reached out, picked up my phone, and placed it face down on the table. The screen went dark, hiding the betrayal. All right, I said. My voice was perfectly even. Not a tremor, not a ripple of the hurricane tearing through me. Just leave it there. Let's eat first. 2 days earlier, the world outside my living room window was a watercolor painting of gray on gray. A classic Seattle drizzle had been weeping from the sky since morning, blurring the edges of the maple trees and making the streetlights glow with a hazy, premature light. It was just past 4 in the afternoon. Inside, my Victorian home was quiet, a sanctuary of polished wood and old memories. I was settled in my favorite armchair, the one with the worn floral pattern, a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea warming my hands. The silence was a comfortable blanket. Then the phone rang, its cheerful digital chime slicing through the peace. I glanced at the screen. Evan. My heart did its usual little flip-flop, a complicated dance of hope and weariness. I let it ring one more time before answering, taking a steadying breath. Hello, Evan. Mom? His voice was tentative, laced with a practiced sort of shame I knew all too well. Hey, you got a minute? I have a minute, I said, my tone carefully neutral. There was a pause, the sound of him inhaling deeply. Look, Mom, I know I've been a real piece of work lately. I know I've let you down, and I just want to make things right. I stayed silent, letting him talk. This was part of the pattern. The apology tour always came before the ask. I mean it this time, he insisted, as if reading my mind. I want to turn over a new leaf, for real. And I want to start with you. I want to treat you to a really nice dinner. Down at the harbor, that fancy seafood place you like. My treat. I took a sip of my tea. The bergamot was fragrant, calming. What's the occasion, Evan? The occasion is us, he said, his voice suddenly brimming with an almost manic energy. It's about fixing things. And Mom, I have something amazing to share with you. Something incredible. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A real game changer that could change everything for both of us. For both of us. Those were the words that always hooked me. The idea that we were a team. That his success was my success. It was a powerful lure. My husband, his father, had been gone for 10 years now, and the fierce primal need to see my son happy, to see him secure, was a weakness Evan had learned to exploit. But I wanted to believe him. Every fiber of my being, every cell in this weary mother's heart, screamed at me to believe him. I closed my eyes. A single, deep crease formed between my brows. A nice dinner sounds lovely, Evan. The relief in his voice was a palpable wave. Great. Is Friday okay? Say 7 o'clock? Friday at 7 is fine. Awesome, Mom. This is going to be great. You'll see. After we hung up, I didn't move. My eyes remained closed, shutting out the gray afternoon. I ran my thumb over the smooth, cool glass of the phone's screen, as if I could somehow feel the sincerity I so desperately craved from the son on the other end of the line. My gaze drifted to the small, silver-plated frame on the end table beside me. It was a picture of me and my husband, Richard, on our wedding day. We were young, impossibly young, standing proudly in front of the house. Our house. Richard's arm was around my waist, and we were both laughing, beaming at a future that felt as solid and real as the foundation beneath our feet. I wanted that feeling back. I wanted to believe this dinner was the first step. The echo of Evan's promises lingered in the quiet room long after the call ended. Hope is a stubborn, treacherous thing. I pushed myself out of the armchair, my joints protesting quietly, and left the half-finished tea on the table. The gray light of the afternoon seemed to have deepened, and the house felt vast and silent around me. I walked from the living room into the main hall, my hand instinctively finding the cool, smooth wood of the cherry banister. The staircase was my daily mountain, but today I took the ascent one step at a time, as if each tread was a page in a history book I was forced to reread. My fingers trailed along the polished wood, a familiar path they had traced thousands of times. Halfway up, I paused. My gaze fell on the first in a gallery of framed memories that lined the wall. It was Evan's college graduation photo. There he was, 22 and beaming, clutching a diploma like a winning lottery ticket. His eyes, so much like his father's, were bright with unfiltered optimism. We had been so proud, so certain he had the world at his feet. A pang of an old familiar ache resonated in my chest. That bright-eyed boy had no idea of the stumbles and bad bets that lay ahead of him, the string of failed ventures and borrowed money that would slowly chip away at that brilliant shine. I moved up another few steps and stopped again. A family camping trip from when Evan was 10. Richard, my Richard, had his arm around me, his flannel shirt a blur of red and black. He was grilling burgers, a plume of smoke rising behind him. Evan stood in the foreground, proudly holding up a tiny fish he'd caught, his 2 front teeth missing. We were happy. It was a simple, uncomplicated happiness that felt a world away now, a snapshot from another lifetime. My hand came to rest on the final, largest frame near the top of the landing. It was from our wedding. Richard looked impossibly handsome, and I was a girl in a white dress, believing our life together would be a fortress. Looking at his face, his kind eyes, the memory came rushing back, not as a gentle wave, but as a sudden, overwhelming tide. It was near the end. He was in our bed, the one we'd shared for nearly 40 years, and the illness had whittled him down to almost nothing. But his voice, though weak, was firm, his grip on my hand surprisingly strong. He had looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the window that overlooked the garden he had so lovingly tended. "Marjorie," he'd whispered, his breath catching. "This house, promise me. This house isn't just bricks and mortar. It's our memories. It's Evan's height marked on the kitchen doorframe. It's the ghost of my bad singing in the shower. It's the scent of your roses in June." He squeezed my hand. "Selling it would be like cutting off our own roots. Don't let anyone ever make you do that." A tear I hadn't realized was forming escaped and traced a cold path down my cheek. I had promised him. It was a sacred vow. My fingers left the frame and brushed against the wall beside it, finding a familiar imperfection in the plaster. A long, jagged scratch, painted over, but still visible if you knew where to look. Evan, age 8, had been trying to ride his new bicycle down the stairs, a harebrained scheme that ended in a crash of tangled limbs and metal. I remembered my initial flash of anger, quickly replaced by overwhelming relief when I saw he was unhurt, just a little stunned. He had looked up at me, his lip trembling, expecting a scolding. Instead, I had just held him. I smiled now, a sad, wistful smile. The house held it all, the triumphs, the heartbreaks, the laughter and the scars. It was the only thing that had remained constant. It had held us, protected us. It was our roots, and I was going to have dinner with the son who now wanted to change everything. The restaurant was called the Salty Anchor, and it stood like a glass jewel on the edge of Pier 57. The wind blowing in from Puget Sound was a different kind of cold than the drizzle back home. It carried a sharp metallic tang of salt and diesel fuel. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, feeling a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. The parking lot was a maze of luxury cars, all gleaming under the dim streetlights. A sleek, black sedan pulled into the spot next to us. Carter Lawson stepped out. He was taller than I'd expected, and he moved with a fluid, confident ease. He was already smiling as he walked toward us, a wide, practiced grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He extended a hand toward me. His grip was too firm, a silent assertion of dominance, and he held on just a second too long. "Marjorie, it's a real pleasure to finally meet you," he said, his voice as smooth as his smile. "Evan has told me so much about you." Evan stood beside him, fidgeting. He looked like a man trying to play a role he hadn't fully memorized. His shoulders were hunched, and his eyes darted from me to Carter and back again, a silent, nervous ping-pong match. Carter released my hand and slapped Evan on the shoulder, a little too hard. I really admire Evan, he said, turning his attention back to me. The guy has a real head for finance, a born risk taker. You'll be proud of him soon, Marjorie. I politely but firmly withdrew my hand. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold knot of suspicion in my stomach. Hello, Mr. Lawson, I replied, my voice steady. Evan doesn't often talk about his friends. It was a small barb, delivered without malice, but it landed with the desired effect. Evan's face flushed. Carter's smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes shifted. A flicker of annoyance, quickly masked. He had clearly expected a different, more deferential response from me. But it was Evan's eyes that held my attention. As Carter spoke, building him up in my presence, I saw it. A look of complete dependency, a desperate need for approval. Evan wasn't a partner in this venture. He was a subordinate, a tool, a boy looking to his master. Even worse, there was a flash of something that looked a lot like fear. My mother's intuition, a sense that had been dulled by years of false alarms and forgiving too much, suddenly snapped back to life. It was a cold, clear certainty. The alarm bells weren't ringing. They were deafening. Whatever was happening tonight, it wasn't about fixing things. It wasn't about a son wanting to make his mother proud. It was about a desperate man, an opportunity, and a powerful predator. And the predator was watching me. I took a breath and forced a small, polite smile. Shall we go in? It's getting a bit chilly out here. We were seated at a corner table, the city lights a glittering backdrop to the unfolding drama. A young waitress placed a platter of appetizers between us, seared scallops and calamari. The initial pleasantries had evaporated, leaving a tense silence that the cheerful clinking of silverware couldn't quite fill. Evan picked at a scallop, pushing it around his plate. Carter sipped his wine, watching me over the rim of his glass with an unblinking, reptilian gaze. They were laying the groundwork, and I decided to let them. Evan was the one to break the silence, just as I knew he would be. He cleared his throat. You know, Mom, he began, his tone artificially casual. Real estate prices in Queen Anne are just crazy high these days. I was looking online. I heard our house could be worth over $2 million now. Can you believe that? He said it like he was sharing a fun fact, but it was a key turning in a lock. It was the opening line of a well-rehearsed play. Right on cue, Carter leaned forward, placing his wine glass down with a soft click. With the market like this, Marjorie, have you ever considered restructuring your assets? He asked, and his voice smooth as silk. Leveraging that equity? A lot of people in your position are cashing out. Think about it. Moving to a first-class assisted living community. No more worrying about roof repairs, yard work, property taxes. Just 24/7 care and a nice fat nest egg to enjoy. The words were slick with poison. People in your position. He made me sound like a decrepit old woman, a burden who couldn't manage her own affairs. He was painting a picture of a gilded cage, trying to sell me on the idea of abandoning my home for a life of managed decline. The alarm bells in my head were no longer just ringing. They were a clanging, deafening siren. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a sales pitch. I kept my face a mask of polite interest. I picked up a piece of calamari with my fork. I'm quite happy where I am, Mr. Lawson. My roses need me. My simple domestic answer seemed to throw them off for a second. Evan jumped back in, his voice a little too eager. Right, of course, Mom. But it's just about being smart with money, he pressed on. Speaking of which, do you still have the mortgage papers? The deed and all that? I was thinking I could take a look, just to see if there's anything we can optimize. Maybe refinance, get a better rate. Just trying to help you save a little money. There it was. The next step. Get the documents. Get control. He made it sound so innocent, so helpful. The son just trying to look out for his aging mother. But I saw right through it. I saw the puppet. And I saw the puppeteer's hands pulling the strings. As if to punctuate Evan's words, Carter reached into his expensive leather briefcase, which had been resting by his chair. He pulled out a thick, crisp white envelope and slid it across the table toward me. It stopped just short of my water glass. My eyes dropped to it. Embossed in neat gold letters on the front were the words, "Proof of funds, Lawson Capital LLC." It was a power play, a vulgar display meant to overwhelm me, to show me the sheer size of the money on the table and make me feel small, to make the deal feel so real, so immediate, that I would be a fool to refuse. I looked at the envelope, then I looked up, meeting Carter's smug gaze, then Evan's anxious one. I didn't touch it. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my ice water, letting the silence stretch. I would not take the bait. My excuse of needing the ladies' room was flimsy, but neither Evan nor Carter questioned it. They were too busy watching the untouched envelope on the table, confident their trap was set. I needed a moment. I needed to breathe in air that wasn't thick with betrayal. The restroom was sterile and cold, a shock of bright white tiles and gleaming chrome after the dim, wood-paneled ambiance of the dining room. I gripped the edge of the marble countertop, my knuckles white. My reflection stared back at me, a pale, 75-year-old woman whose eyes held a storm. The words from the text message were seared into my brain. "He's selling your house. Tonight." The DocuSign screenshot was a brand on my memory. I was staring at my own face, but I didn't recognize the person looking back. Who was she? A victim? A fool? The restroom door opened with a soft whoosh, and I flinched. It was the young waitress who had served our appetizers, the one with the kind eyes. She was carrying a small stack of folded hand towels. She glanced toward the stalls, saw they were empty, and then her eyes locked on mine in the mirror. Her professional smile vanished, replaced by a look of genuine alarm. She moved quietly to the sink next to mine, pretending to busy herself with the soap dispenser. "Mrs. Hale?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "It's me, Sienna. Sienna Nguyen. I was in your homeroom in middle school, at Queen Anne Middle." The name clicked, and a fuzzy image of a bright girl with pigtails surfaced from the depths of my memory. My mind, however, was too clouded with the present to grasp onto the past. "Sienna," I repeated, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Ma'am, listen to me," she said, her words a frantic rush. "Please, don't sign anything tonight. I'm so sorry. I wasn't trying to snoop, but I accidentally saw the email on that guy's iPad when he left it open. He has an appointment with an online notary scheduled for 9:30 p.m. She took a shaky breath. And I waited on your son last week. He was with a friend, and I heard him bragging. He said he was about to close a huge deal right at the dinner table and finally get his hands on his inheritance. The word inheritance hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't dead. This wasn't an inheritance. It was theft. Sienna's hand shot out and pressed something into mine. It was a paper napkin, folded into a tight little square. "I wrote it down," she whispered. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the fear and conviction warring in her young face. She was taking a huge risk for me, a teacher from over a decade ago. As she turned and fled the restroom, my fingers uncurled. I opened the napkin. Scrawled in blue pen, in rushed, messy handwriting, were the words, "E-Notary, 9:30 p.m. High cancellation fee contract." The initial shock, the icy numbness, it all burned away. In its place, a terrible, painful clarity descended. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, cold-blooded plan. The high cancellation fee. That was the leverage, the reason for the pressure, the gun to my head. I crushed the napkin in my fist. The paper was a fragile anchor in the hurricane of my emotions. The image of the fool in the mirror was gone. The hurt was still there, a deep, gaping wound in my soul. But something else was crystallizing over it. Something hard and cold and sharp. It was resolve. I smoothed my dress, lifted my chin, and looked at my reflection one last time. The woman staring back was no longer a victim. She was a mother about to protect her home, and she was going to war. The walk back from the restroom felt like a mile. The smooth jazz music that had seemed sophisticated just minutes ago now sounded like a funeral dirge. The low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses felt distant, like sounds from another world. My world had shrunk to the crushed napkin in my fist and the roaring in my ears. I had to place a hand against the cool wood-paneled wall to steady myself, my breath catching in my throat. And that's when the memory hit me, ambushing me in the hallway. It wasn't a gentle recollection. It was a ghost leaping out of the past, cold and solid. Evan was 20. He stood in this very same hallway. No, not this one. The one at home, but the feeling was identical. He was crying, his face blotchy and swollen. Not the quiet tears of sadness, but the ugly, heaving sobs of utter shame. He couldn't look at me. He just stared at the worn pattern on our Persian rug as he confessed. He'd taken his grandfather's gold pocket watch, my father's watch, the one Richard had promised to pass down to him, and pawned it. He had gambling debts, again. The money was gone, lost on a horse that didn't win or a hand of cards that went south. "Just this once, Mom," he choked out, the words mangled by his sobs. "I promise I'll quit. I swear to God I'll get help. I can get it back. I just need—" He needed money. He always needed money. I remembered the feeling of betrayal then. It had been a sharp, physical pain, like a knife twisting in my gut. But it was diluted by my love for him, by the desperate maternal instinct to fix what was broken. I had taken the money from my savings account, the nest egg Richard and I had carefully built, and I had gone to the pawn shop myself. I remembered the bored look on the clerk's face as he slid the watch, my father's watch, across the counter. It felt cheapened, tarnished, not by time, but by my son's desperation. I had saved him. I had bought back the piece of our family history, and I had believed his promises. I had paid for counseling. I had held him while he cried. I had chosen to believe that it was a one-time, rock-bottom mistake. Fool me once. The memory faded, leaving the bitter taste of truth in its place. The man sitting at that table, smiling his strained smile, was the same boy who had sold his heritage for a quick fix. The only thing that had changed was the scale of the betrayal. He'd graduated from a pocket watch to a $2 million house. My house. My roots. The pain in my chest was immense, a crushing weight. But as I stood there, leaning against the wall of that soulless restaurant, the pain began to change. It began to cool, to harden. It forged itself into something else. The hurt was still there, but it was now encased in ice. The naive hope that had brought me here tonight was dead and buried. I took a deep, shuddering breath, pulling in the stale, conditioned air. I pushed myself off the wall. My spine straightened. My hand, still clutching Sienna's note, relaxed and then tightened into a fist of pure resolve. History was repeating itself, but this time, the ending would be different. I would not be the savior. I would not be the enabler. I would be the one who finally said, "No more." I started walking again, my steps no longer hesitant. They were firm, measured. I was no longer walking back to a dinner. I was walking onto a battlefield. When I returned to the table, the main course had arrived. 2 beautiful plates of pan-seared salmon rested on beds of creamy mashed potatoes with vibrant green asparagus spears arranged just so. It looked like a picture from a magazine, a perfect meal that no one was going to eat. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, heavy enough to choke on. Carter's smile was gone, replaced by a tight, impatient line. Evan wouldn't look at me. He stared intently at his salmon, as if it held the answers to the universe. I sat down, placed my napkin in my lap, and picked up my fork. Then, I completely ignored Carter Lawson. I turned my full attention, my entire being, to my son. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I did the last thing either of them expected. I spoke to him gently. "Evan," I said, my voice soft, almost conversational. "A funny thing popped into my head just now. Do you remember the smell of the paint in your bedroom when you were little?" He flinched, his fork clattering softly against his plate. He finally looked up, his eyes wide and panicked. "What? I don't know, Mom. Paint smells like paint." "No, not this paint," I continued, a faint, wistful smile on my face. "It was that specific shade of blue. Sky blue, you called it. Your father had to mix it 3 times to get it just right for you. It had this chalky, sweet smell. For weeks, the whole upstairs smelled like your blue sky. You were so proud of that room." A bead of sweat trickled down Evan's temple. He looked like a cornered animal. He glanced at Carter, a desperate, silent plea for help. But Carter was staring at me. His eyes narrowed, trying to figure out what game I was playing. I didn't let up. I kept my voice as soft as a lullaby. "And what about the maple tree in the backyard?" I asked Ed. "The big one by the fence. Do you remember climbing it? You carved your initials into the trunk with that little pocket knife your grandfather gave you. You carved your name, and then a heart, and then the initials of that little girl next door, Sarah. Every autumn, that tree turns the most brilliant shade of red. It sets that whole corner of the yard on fire. It's about to turn now, you know." Evan's face was pale. He started shifting in his seat, his expensive suit suddenly looking too tight, too hot. He wiped his sweaty palm on his trousers. "Mom, I don't see what this has to do with anything," he stammered. "It has to do with everything, Evan," I said, my voice still quiet, but now with an edge of cold steel beneath the velvet. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Carter's fingers begin to tap a frantic, silent rhythm on the white tablecloth. Tap, tap, tap. He was losing control of the situation. His timeline was slipping. I wasn't reacting with tears or anger. I wasn't looking at his impressive envelope full of money. I was playing a different game entirely. I was reminding my son that a house isn't an asset. It's a life. It's the smell of paint and the names carved in a tree. I was giving him one last chance. One final off-ramp on the highway to hell he was speeding down. And I was letting the shark in the suit know that he was swimming in my water now. The stalemate at our table was a thick, suffocating blanket. Carter's tapping finger was the only sound in our little bubble of misery. I knew I couldn't win this war alone. I needed reinforcements. I needed my lawyer. I pressed my fingertips to my temple and gave a small, convincing sigh. "Evan, I'm so sorry, but I think I have a bit of a migraine coming on. The light in here is suddenly very bright. I'm just going to step out near the lobby for a moment to get my bearings." Before either of them could object, I pushed my chair back and stood up. I didn't look at them as I walked away, my steps measured and calm, betraying none of the frantic urgency pounding in my veins. I headed toward the front of the restaurant, a bustling area near the host stand and the coat check. The noise and movement provided the perfect cover. My eyes scanned the area, and I saw her, Sienna. She was wiping down an empty table near the entrance, her back to me, but I knew she was aware of my approach. As I passed, she glanced over her shoulder, a quick, almost imperceptible nod of solidarity. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a soldier's salute. I found a small alcove near the coat check, partially hidden by a large potted fern. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were surprisingly steady as I pulled out my phone. I didn't need to look up the number. I knew it by heart. I pressed the familiar digits for Naomi Brooks, our family lawyer for over 30 years. She was more than a lawyer. She was a bulldog, a friend. The phone rang once, twice. My stomach twisted into a knot. "Please, Naomi, pick up." Naomi Brooks. Her voice was crisp, professional, even at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. I turned my back to the room, cupping the phone with my hand, my voice a desperate whisper. "Naomi, it's Marjorie Hale. Listen to me." The words tumbled out, a frantic, hushed torrent. "He's tricking me, Naomi. Evan and another guy, a shark named Carter Lawson. They're trying to force me to sell the house. Right here, right now, at the dinner table. They have an e-notary scheduled for 9:30. What do I do? God, Naomi, what do I do?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a silence that lasted only a second but felt like an eternity. When Naomi spoke again, all traces of pleasantry were gone. Her voice was pure, cold steel. "Marjorie, listen to me very carefully. Do not sign anything. Do you hear me? Nothing." "I won't," I whispered. "Good. Now, I'm on my way. I just need to know where you are." "The Salty Anchor on Pier 57. "Got it. I'll be there as fast as I can. Your job now is to stall. Run out the clock, whatever it takes." The line went dead. I leaned against the wall, my legs feeling weak with a strange mixture of terror and relief. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Naomi. "Absolutely do not sign. Stall for time. Demand to see the original paper contract. Say your lawyer is on her way. Where are you? Send me the address. I'm coming." I read the message twice. The last two words, in all caps, were a declaration of war. They were the sound of the cavalry cresting the hill. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and put the phone back in my purse. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut. But now it had a partner. Righteous, burning anger. They had thrown me into the water to drown, but Naomi had just thrown me a lifeline. And I was about to use it to pull their whole rotten ship down with me. I walked back to the table with the steady calm of a storm's eye. Inside, a tempest of anger and adrenaline was raging, but on the surface, I was placid. I sat down, meeting Carter's glare with a cool indifference. The time for games was over. He had clearly reached the same conclusion. His patience had snapped. With a sharp, aggressive movement, he picked up the iPad and slid it across the table. It stopped directly in front of my plate. On the screen, the DocuSign page glowed, my name a silent accusation in the signature box. "Marjorie, we don't have all night," Carter snapped, his voice losing its silken veneer, revealing the raw, ugly impatience beneath. "The clock is ticking. This is an excellent offer, but it's contingent on closing the deal tonight. It expires at midnight." It was the final push, the classic high-pressure sales tactic, the manufactured deadline, the threat of a lost opportunity. A few minutes ago, it might have rattled me. Now, It was just noise. I looked at the glowing screen. I looked at Carter's hard, predatory face. Then I looked at my son, who was staring at the iPad as if it were a bomb about to detonate. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my hands flat on the table. I pushed the iPad back to the center of the table. A clear, unmistakable rejection. I will not be signing anything on an iPad, I stated, my voice clear and firm, cutting through the tense air. If you want me to consider this offer, I want to see the original paper contract. Every single page. Carter's jaw tightened. That's not how we do business. It's inefficient. It's how I do business, I countered, my gaze unwavering. And furthermore, you won't have to worry about explaining it to me. My lawyer, Miss Naomi Brooks, is on her way here to review it for me. The name hit the table with the force of a gavel. Carter froze. His mask of command finally cracked, revealing a flicker of pure, undiluted panic. Evan, beside him, looked like he'd been shot. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with terror. But I wasn't finished. I saved the final, most devastating blow for my son. I turned my eyes to him, pinning him in his chair with my gaze. I let the silence stretch for a heartbeat, and then I delivered the killing stroke, my voice dropping to a low, lethal calm. Sienna already told me about the 9:30 p.m. appointment with the e-notary Evan. That was it. The final pin pulled from the grenade. The color drained from Evan's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. He looked like a ghost. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Just a wet, gasping noise. He started to shake his head, a pathetic, jerky motion. No, Mom, it's not, he stammered, his words a meaningless jumble. The game was over. The board had been flipped. Carter stared at me, the gears turning furiously behind his eyes as he processed the total implosion of his plan. He had underestimated the old woman. He had assumed I was a relic, easily manipulated and scared. He never imagined I would have allies. He never imagined I would fight back. He looked from my face to Evan's crumbling one and back again. He knew. In that single, devastating moment, the shark knew the trap had snapped shut, not on me, but on him. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening. It stretched for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the distant murmur of the restaurant and the sound of my own quiet, steady breathing. At 8:35 p.m., the game was over, and we all knew it. The untouched plates of salmon and asparagus sat cold between us, a monument to their failed plan. Carter was the first to move. He slowly, deliberately, picked up his half-empty wine glass and drained it. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on Evan, and the cold disdain in his eyes was more chilling than any rage. Evan, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. You've wasted my time. A lot of my time. We're done. He didn't need to say more. It was a verbal execution. The deal was off. The business partnership was a phantom. Evan was a liability, and Carter Lawson had no use for liabilities. He stood up, adjusted the cuffs of his expensive suit, and gave the table a last dismissive glance. He walked away without a backward glance, a shark leaving a carcass in the water. Evan, my son, watched him go. He was a portrait of pathetic desperation. He turned to me, his hands now folded in a pleading gesture. No, Carter, wait. I'll handle it. Please, I'll handle it, he cried out, his voice cracking. Then, his eyes, filled with tears, fell on me. Mom will listen to me. She's just upset. We can still do this. I'll make her see reason. He was still playing the same old tune, the one I had let him play my whole life, the one where he was the hapless victim and I was the one who had to fix everything. I looked at him, truly looked at him, at the man, not the boy. And for the first time in a long time, the maternal instinct to protect him was gone, replaced by a deep, weary finality. I took a breath that was a mixture of sorrow and steel. I've listened to you enough, Evan, for your whole life. My voice was not angry. It was simply a statement of fact. Now I have a job to do, and you have a job to do. I reached into my purse, pulled out my wallet, and counted out a stack of $100 bills. My job is to go home and call my lawyer and get my affairs in order, to make sure you can never do anything like this again. I placed the money on the table. It was more than enough to cover the bill and the uneaten meal. I took an extra bill from the stack and folded it, placing it deliberately on the table with my son's name on it. Then, I pulled out another 100 and placed it next to the money for the bill. It was a generous tip for a very brave waitress. I looked at Evan one last time, my eyes holding his. He was still waiting for me to save him. "And your job," I said, my voice dropping to a final whisper, "is to go home." I stood up. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away from the table, from the mess, from my son. I walked past Sienna, giving her a brief, grateful smile. I walked through the host stand and out into the cold night air. The wind off the water hit me, a refreshing slap of reality. I had come to a dinner of betrayal, but I had left on my own terms. I had lost a son, but I had saved a home. And tonight, for the first time in a long, long time, that felt like a victory. The next morning, the Seattle sky was a wash of pale, indifferent gray. A fine mist hung in the air, clinging to the porch railings and beating on the leaves of my rose bushes. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm. I stood on the porch, a mug of coffee clutched in my hands. It had long gone cold. I hadn't slept. How could I? I felt like I had aged a decade overnight. A man I didn't know was kneeling by my front door, the metallic scrape and click of his tools echoing in the damp air. The locksmith. Naomi had arranged for him to come first thing, a necessary precaution. He worked efficiently, his movements precise. He was replacing the heart of my home's security, and all I could feel was a profound sense of violation. This lock wasn't to keep strangers out. It was to keep my own son out. The thought was a fresh stab of pain in a chest already full of wounds. My phone, sitting on the small wicker table beside the porch swing, began to buzz. The screen lit up with a name that made my stomach clench. Evan. I stared at it, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. A part of me, the foolish mother part that refused to die, wanted to answer, to hear remorse in his voice. But the rest of me, the part that was now cold and hard and clear, knew what I would hear. I let it ring, the buzzing a vicious insect in the morning calm. It rang, and then fell silent. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But then it started again. He was calling back immediately. He wouldn't let it go. With a sense of grim finality, I reached out and answered, putting the phone to my ear without a word. The voice that hit me was not remorseful. It was a torrent of rage and blame. "You ruined everything," he spat, the words sharp and ugly. "That was my one shot, my one chance to finally get ahead, and you blew it. You never trusted me. You never believed in me." The accusations washed over me, but they had lost their power to wound. They were just words now, the desperate tantrum of a man-child who had been denied his prize. I listened to his tirade, my eyes fixed on the locksmith carefully fitting a new brass tumbler into place. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke. My voice was quiet, hollowed out, devoid of anger or pity. It was just empty. "It's not that I didn't believe in you, Evan. I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It's that I believed in you too many times. I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. I pressed the red icon on the screen, ending the call, severing the final frayed thread that connected us. The locksmith stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. All set, ma'am. He held out a small gleaming ring of new keys. I took them from him. The metal was cold and sharp against my palm, the freshly cut edges unfamiliar. They were the keys to my house, my fortress, and my prison. After he left, I sank onto the porch swing, the chain groaning softly under my weight. I stared out at the quiet yard, the yard that held the ghosts of a little boy on a bicycle and a young couple full of hope. The wind chimes my husband had hung years ago tinkled softly, a gentle metallic whisper. I had saved the house, Richard's house. Our roots were secure, but I knew, with a certainty that was a physical ache in my soul, that I had lost something far more precious in the wreckage of last night's dinner. My phone screen lit up again on the table. A new text message from Evan. I didn't look at it. I didn't have to. I just stared at the empty space where the locksmith's van had been. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I let the tears come. They rolled silently down my cheeks, hot against my cold skin. They weren't tears of relief or of victory. They were tears for the son I had lost, and for the mother who had finally had to let him go. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.